Welcome to FT On Air from the Financial Times in London. I'm Isabel Berwick, Assistant Features Editor for Comment, and I'm delighted to be here to talk about a year of huge change and upheaval in the British exam system. I'm joined today by the FT's political commentator, Miranda Green, and by Sophie Hanscombe from the FT magazine, who this summer took a maths GCSE alongside her 16-year-old daughter. Do please join in wherever you're watching and send in your comments and questions. Sophie, you've written a wonderful and frankly quite terrifying article in this week's FT magazine about your recent experience taking maths GCSE at an age with, shall we say, a 5 in front of it.
Yes.
Because as adults, we spend a lot of time protecting ourselves from that kind of exposure. Can you talk a little bit about why you did it and what the outcome was?
Well, as I say in the piece, it became apparent once my daughter started her GCSE years that, you know, we knew that changes were afoot, but I don't think we really understood how major these changes were. They were the first GCSE cohort that were going to take these new exams. We went to a meeting at the school. They told us about some frankly quite terrifying changes. And it became obvious as the year went on that she was struggling. I kept still thinking, well, I'll have a look at her homework and maybe I can help a bit. And then I began to realise that maths had just changed so much since I did it. And then it just sort of came to me that the obvious thing to do was to actually just refresh, as I saw it, to refresh myself and put a bit of pressure on her and see if I could actually still learn anything. I mean, that was the other thing, I suppose, that was lurking in the back of my mind. And I just kind of thought it might be, I did actually think it might be quite fun, and it was quite fun in the end. But so all those different...
So let's take the suspense out of it. It does have a happy outcome. What did you get for your maths GCSE?
I got a 5, which is a kind of, how did my daughter put it? A low B. And she got, thank goodness, she got a 6, which, as she was quick to tell me, is a high B. So face saving all round. No one failed. She did better than me, which is great.
Perfect result. But Miranda, what is all this with 1 to 9? Where have the A to E's gone?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of confusion because, as Sophie says, it's the first year of these new stronger GCSEs in both maths and English. From next year, that will also be introduced in some other subjects, history, some of the modern foreign languages and sciences. This is about trying to make the English exam system a bit more rigorous for the reason that we're very worried in this country that we're falling behind the international competition. And the reason they've concentrated on English and maths is obviously because they're the most important core subjects. And at this age, this exam that you take, age 15, 16, that is the one that's used for the international benchmarking of how well educated the country is and whether the school system's doing what it should do. So in the coalition years, Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, decided to change the GCSEs, starting with English and maths. And essentially, they've gone from measuring things where a C grade or above, up to the top grade of an A star, was a pass, and then obviously A star, the best pass. It's now measured 1 to 9, 9 being the absolute tip top. And parents are finding it quite difficult to understand the new grading system, but essentially, a 4 is a pass, but a 5 is what's known as a strong pass. That's right. And if a GCSE candidate gets a 9, that's the very top. That's really very,
is
very
it
good
higher
indeed.
than the old A star?
Yeah, it is.
Right.
In fact, where you used to just have A grade and A star, 7, 8, 9 are spread across those 3, A and A star. So there's more differentiation at the top, as well as trying to shift the pass from the C, which was really seen as too low to be really measuring how well we were doing against other comparable developed economies. And what they really want to do is try and move as much of the cohort as possible up to a 5 from sort of hanging around the 4.
And what's the evidence from this first cohort?
Well, actually, the kids did much better than some people, even inside the Department for Education, thought they were going to do. So it's relatively positive. In terms of kind of improving the UK's showing overall, they need to get more people from the 4 to the 5, as we were saying. At the moment, our sort of average in England was about 4.7, and they reckon that the 5 most successful countries in terms of these tests at 15, 16 would have got about a 5.4. So we need to up it from there. But also crucially, and this is really important when you look at what happens in English schools, they reckon there's about there's a really large quantity of kids who are actually right down at the bottom level, and they need to improve their performance dramatically also. So it's a double whammy of things that the English education system's now got to do. It's got to improve the people getting to a 5, and it's got to improve the people who are right down stuck on the bottom on the kind of 2s and 3s and get them up to a 4 or a 5 as well.
So it's a time of turmoil actually. And Sophie, you took your GCSE at an evening class, I believe.
Yeah.
What sort of people were putting themselves in for GCSEs as adults, I presume, or were there 16 to 18-year-olds?
Well, there were a few who were effectively resitting.
For them on a new
I know,
syllabus.
on a almost in very different exam. Then there were a lot of people from other countries who needed a GCSE in maths and English to move themselves up the pay scale, basically. There were certain jobs that they simply couldn't apply for if they didn't have GCSEs in maths and English.
It's very moving, your piece, actually, because the dedication that's required in people coming to the UK and climbing up the ladder gradually.
And it was, as I say in the piece, for me personally, it was just after Brexit, and I found it excruciating, basically. So there were a lot of Eastern Europeans in my class, all of whom, my teacher, who I got to know a little bit, did explain to me afterwards that Hungarians in particular are really good at maths because they have a chess programme at school. There's a very famous Hungarian chess player whose name I've forgotten. And on the back of this, they're very big on chess in Hungary. And they found that chess is an excellent way of building a mathematical brain, basically.
Oh, is it Judith Polgar?
Yes, that's right. Yep, that's right.
A female.
Yeah, a woman,
yes.
a grand mistress.
Yes, indeed. So I think a lot of parents, I mean, my daughter took her GCSEs in the last year of the last cohort. Miranda, do you think those exams are going to be seen as somewhat devalued in future as we move into this sort of much higher quality world?
Well, that is the problem with changes to the exam system, is devaluing the previous, currency.
Does that always happens?
That always happens when you make changes. I think they're hoping that because they do this gradually, that schools and indeed employers and universities looking at it will sort of gradually adjust. I mean, there are a lot of problems with it already. Schools and parents found it quite difficult to understand what was going on, not least while the kids were actually preparing for the exams, as Sophie has explained. But also, actually, there are some warning signs even today from Ofsted. The new head of Ofsted has said she's concerned that actually some of the other GCSE subjects are going to have to get squeezed out because the new tougher GCSE syllabus might have to spread across 3 years rather than 2, and that takes up a lot more time in school, of course, and then some of these extra subjects, which are actually terribly important for preparing people for the new world of work, some of the arts subjects, broader humanities subjects, and indeed modern foreign languages, might sort of have to be squeezed out of the timetable. So, it's a big adjustment for schools to make, but we do have some stubborn issues in this country, and one of which is this long tail of underachievement at the bottom end. And at the moment, we're failing those kids because they're not getting up to a level where they're equipped to move up the pay scales into good, well-remunerated work. So some effort has to be put into, getting them up to a level which is the internationally recognised level for where you should be at age 15,
Because I think there is a question. I mean, I know a lot of kids who've got 14 or 15 GCSEs under the old system, and that seems to me crazy. I mean, I think you write in your piece about how your daughter's school was dropping.
They dropped the whole sort of slot for a subject, and then divvied up that time between maths and English, rather what you're saying.
And is that permanent going forward?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what they're going to do this year when there's even more kind of timetabling issues to think about with the new marking system being extended across other subjects. But I mean, for example, I thought it was odd that she had to choose between history or geography. Now, I don't know if that's a result of dropping a whole subject, in timetabling terms, but that seems like a worry to me. I don't really think you should be dropping history or geography. I don't think you should be doing one or the other at that age.
So this is part of the other issue, which is how the schools are actually measured, and that is to do with a new measure called the EBAC, and some other new measures that have been introduced, and you're supposed to do a humanity.
Is this another Michael Gove?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because you want every child to do well, and there are clearly kids who are capable of, for example, getting multiple GCSEs. And in a big state sector school, arguably some of these changes will make them focus on the kids who need a bit more help rather than the ones who can collect into double figures.
But in some senses that puts even, I mean, we've had some figures this week about it's half of all London children are tutored. You know, does it push parents more into the music and sport and an extra language as an optional paid for extra? I mean, it might have some social mobility consequences.
I mean, Julian Lloyd-Webber was talking this week about this new music school that's opened in Birmingham, and was saying that, you know, while he's delighted that it's opened, music now has become, as he put it, a quirky add-on at most state schools now. And if you're a middle-class parent, you know, you'll be paying for music lessons, as I have, But I mean, and actually, if you look at the countries in the Far East, which are often seen as models in other subjects, everyone there gets a bash at an instrument at school, whereas that seems to be disappearing from our schooling.
This is really interesting, I think, because also it's to do with what does the UK want to become?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, what are our strengths as a nation? And actually, one of our strengths is not just the arts in the sense of, you know, music and drama and visual art and what you might call the arts as a sector. It's, you know, design and it's creativity and it's innovation and it's unconventional ways of thinking, all of which are actually incredibly important to our economy and make us more competitive. So all the chat that's gone on in recent years about STEM subjects, which is science, tech, engineering and maths, the new buzzword actually is STEAM, which is that you add the arts into that. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? No, but
not as STEAM.
Literally, that you add the arts into that, and then you have a really creative mix. So this issue about whether other subjects get squeezed out is crucial, but of course it's also crucial that we try and equip everyone with the basics to the best level that they can achieve. So it's a really difficult balancing act.
And I know school budgets have been cut, so I mean certainly the drama budget at both my kids' schools has been cut to the bone. But those are the things that are just not happening. I mean, and you said your daughter had been at a special maths boot camp, which presumably was paid for by the school. I mean, that's where they have to target their resources there. It's a very difficult choice to have to make.
In fact, she signed up for guitar lessons at school, and I think she signed up 3 years ago, and she's still waiting to have one. I mean, I just say that in passing.
There we go. There we are. Now, Miranda, is what Sophie did unusual? Have you heard? I mean, you've been in education for a long time. Have you heard of this sort of thing before?
Well, actually, there are some really good examples of inspiring teachers doing this for exactly the reasons that Sophie talks about in her piece, to encourage, to give a little bit of camaraderie and competition, I think you describe it as, with your daughter. And I did interview the sort of pioneering headmaster, Anthony Selden, who at the time was sitting a philosophy public exam alongside his cohort of children who were doing it in his school. For very much that reason. And actually, when I interviewed him, he'd just done his mocks and he'd done incredibly badly. He was a bit humiliated. So there's always a risk involved. I'm glad that Sophie came out of it.
I did very badly in my mocks.
Did you?
Yeah.
So that's hope for us or everyone. Miranda, there's more changes coming this September. What do you think? So if we're looking, say, for parents who've got children 3 to 5 years ahead, like your children are still in primary school, what do you think the shape of British secondary education and the exam system is going to be looking like? If we could, I mean, I suppose it all depends on who's in government, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot could change and a lot could stay the same, because, you know, every sort of decade or so, there's a grand plan to overhaul secondary education.
They can't leave it alone, can they?
It never quite happens. But I think your question about sort of primary into secondary is interesting. For example, you know, when Sophie talks in her piece about the way that the maths syllabus has changed and this new emphasis on problem solving, and how you're not just presented with a sum, as we used to be at school. I mean, I'm old enough to have done an O level. You know, you did sums, This is, you're given a problem and you quite often have to take it from a verbally described problem through working out what the maths is to get you to solve the issue.
So it's not Jack has 3 apples.
There's a few of those,
right.
but the further along the paper you get, the harder it gets in terms of it's embedded in these questions.
So for children who have verbal processing problems, so perhaps some children on the autistic spectrum, that's probably quite hard.
It is, and actually I have heard cases of kids who thought they were really good at maths because they're very good at the pattern side of maths, struggling with this new emphasis on problem solving. On the other hand, kids who are much better at sort of logic have a chance to do better at maths potentially if they actually see that it's an application where you have to work out a real world issue. But my children are much younger than Sophie's. They're in primary school, and already you can see that what they're doing has changed in order to prepare them for this new sort of maths in secondary. It's much more problem solving and much less. But some things are being squeezed out. I think they don't do enough of the spatial maths. So it's interesting your example of chess in the Hungarian schools. I think they need to do more of that 3-dimensional stuff. The boys get a lot of it, of course, because they're playing Minecraft all the time, which is very good for maths, and Lego kits. The girls don't get it enough, so they need more of it in schools.
And when we were at school, certainly when I went to very traditional girls' private schools, we spent hours learning our times tables, and it was absolutely drilled into us at quite an early age. And I noticed that didn't really happen for my children. I don't think they've ever really learnt their times tables. Is that the sort of thing? I mean, that seems like quite a Govian ideal. Is that the sort of thing?
I'm not sure it's totally happening, or not if my family's anything to go by. It certainly should be. I mean, Sophie, you say that your maths teacher said
my
it
maths
was
teacher was absolutely obsessed with times tables.
And that's the foundation.
He thinks that's the foundation.
As parents,
for
that's what we
everything.
should be offering our kids as a foundational.
He taught his son his times tables by the time he was 5. There's a challenge. Using flashcards, he told us, with a great smile on his face, and we're all right. He said, you can make it fun, which is probably true. And he thinks that underpins absolutely everything to do with maths. He says you've got to get to a point where you can't remember not knowing your tables. It's so integral to your sort of whole being.
Just looking back on your experience, has it changed the way you think or are? Because maths is a language, essentially. I mean, you have a very verbal job. You're editing copy, thinking things through. Has it changed the way you think or are?
A bit. I think it made my mental maths quicker. I did notice that. Not that we do much mental maths, but I was just aware that side of my brain was working a bit more quickly. He made me think more. I mean, there were things I didn't put in the piece about. There was a big protest in the class once because we were doing something that involved us having to do a 15 times table, and everyone was saying, 15 times table, we can't do that. And he was saying, yes, you can. Think about a clock, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90. And once you start thinking like that, it's amazing, how you can take that on. But so some things have sort of filtered through, I think. But I wouldn't pretend to be, a lot better at maths.
It's a really good question, though, because, when we look at the countries that are really fantastic about at maths, when you look at Singapore and Hong Kong and the Shanghai area, and actually one thing that they have is that maths and number games and patterns are incredibly embedded in the culture, So here in the UK, we're in the middle of this experiment to try and absorb some of the ways they teach maths in Singapore into our own primary schools. But something you can't import, of course, is you can't import the way that numbers are part of the culture from a very young age.
And
they aren't here. This is a very verbal culture here, as you've said.
But musical talent and maths often go hand. I mean, I know, Sophie, you went to music school, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I've never been aware of that link.
Till now.
Till now.
Yeah.
I don't know. In my own experience, I've seen a lot of children who seem to think in that way. So I was quite interested that you felt maths was not your strong point at all. But maybe that's just through it's the lack of it in our lives. It just falls into. It's not part of our culture.
I think a lot of it also, let's face it, comes down to your experience at school with your teachers, doesn't it? And a good teacher, as I rediscovered on this course, makes such a difference, a huge difference.
So what's your daughter going on to study at A-level, and will you be joining her?
No. One thing I've learnt is that she can get on fine without me. She's going to. Actually, the maths is relevant because she wanted to do A-level psychology, and you needed. I'm not sure what the stipulation now is, but sort of 2 years ago, the thinking was that you would need a 6 in maths, a high B, and she sort of more or less discounted it by the middle of her sort of 2 years, and was saying, well, I'll never get a 6 in maths. And of course she did get a 6 in maths, so it's great that she can go on and do psychology now. But that is the level of her maths for the next 2 years. So English Lit, psychology, RE, politics. Yeah.
Oh, it's been great to talk to you, Sophie. Thank you so much, Miranda, as well, and thank you. And this has been FT Live on exams. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you soon.